We are here to talk about the red-hot TCU Horned Frogs. How have they improved? And does it give you hope for 2025? We'll talk about it next here on Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day.
You are Locked On Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
That's right, your team every day. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, also on your favorite podcast platform. Matt Jennings is next to me if you're watching on YouTube. And Matt, I guess it hasn't been a while since we talked. We talked after the Baylor game, but it's been a little inconsistent. I was out of town. We had a bye week. Things were going on. TCU has won 4 of their last 5. They took down Arizona 49-28. They took care of business against Oklahoma State. I know one of the things we talked about last time we convened was, can they actually win a game convincingly? Because going into these 2 games that they've won, it was like, yeah, they've beaten some teams, but they've never really pulled away from anybody. They've done that in the past 2 weeks at home. So were you impressed by that? I mean, listen, like Arizona and Oklahoma State are bad. We saw those teams. But it does feel like this was an area or a ceiling that maybe this TCU team couldn't reach this year, and they found a way to do it late in the season.
I said on Saturday, I didn't know if this team was really capable of that, of kind of like, of just like winning so decisively. And admittedly that, and to do so 2 weeks in a row, like they did it against Oklahoma State. And I was like, oh, well, okay, Oklahoma State's really, really bad. And Arizona, to your point, also bad. But for them to do it, I've said this before, like on this podcast, what good teams are supposed to do is handle their business and win decisively against bad teams. Like that is a mark of that is one of the marks of good teams and of great teams. And so for TCU to do that, especially when they had struggled with doing it earlier on in the year, like they had a chance to put away UCF and they didn't do it. They came in at home as a double-digit favorite against Houston, and then they were the non-competitive team in that game. And then even coming out of the bye, they faced a Utah team that had nothing going offensively, and they, only won by 6. They needed, a last-minute turnover to kind of seal it against Texas Tech. Like, I just didn't think that they had the ability to kind of overwhelm opponents like that, or the mental toughness and the resiliency to like kind of drop the clutch and like deliver a statement when they had failed to do so previously in the season. So I was impressed. Again, I think you graded on a curve because you're like, these are the bottom 2 teams in the Big 12. Like these are teams that you should beat.
Right.
But you did everything that you were supposed to do against both of them. And like you can't ask for anything more than that. Other than, okay, now what can you do against a slightly higher quality opponent this week in Cincinnati, right?
I didn't put this in our little roadmap, but something you said there made me think about it. Yeah, they blew that UCF game. There's a world, Matt, where if they hold on against UCF and if they just show up at home against Houston, they possibly already clinched a Big 12 title berth or would have an opportunity to like control their own destiny this week against Cincinnati. And I wonder, I mean, as a competitor, you always want to win. Could the way this season has gone, though, be more beneficial for them long-term? Because I don't feel like they would get embarrassed in the Big 12 title game if they played in it. I'm just not sure anybody in the league is good enough to do that. But I could see if you got to the Big 12 title game and you lost in a close game, you sort of say to yourself, well, everything's headed in the right direction. Like we were right there knocking on the door. It does feel like even if you finish 9-4, there's still a lot of things to look and evaluate in the mirror. Is this just coping, or is there a world where this could be better for the program long-term if they address some of the issues that have been plaguing them the last couple of seasons?
I think they were 3-3 heading into the first bye week, and I do think they were forced to reckon with some things. I think the most obvious of that is they knew they had to figure out some way to cobble together a running game, right? And so to the short answer to your question is, I think going through that adversity early on was good for them in that it forced them to address some problems, whether that was some lineup changes they made on defense, which they did as well, some kind of philosophical approach things they were doing with the run game on offense. They made some changes. And we're now seeing them those changes bear more fruit as we kind of getting further on into the season, which I think is good for them. How substantial those changes actually are, I'm very much in a state of I do not know how to, and if they were to win on Saturday and they finish the season on a 5-1 run after that first bye week, that's really great. You also can't ignore the fact that the circumstances they were operating under also changed, in that they were playing an SMU team that turned out to be really, really good at the beginning of the season. You played a Houston team right before the bye. I still think that's a really, really rough loss, and there's not a way to kind of sugarcoat it.
Yeah,
it does not look as bad today. That is a team that is rebuilding more quickly than we thought under Willie Fritz in year one, right? But every game that you've played in Big 12 play, and especially here in the back end of the schedule, with the exception of the Baylor game, has been teams beneath you in the standings in the Big 12. You would have loved to really take that game against Houston, take that game against UCF, and even if you lose that game against Baylor, to your point, you're feeling better about everything. And it also I think it just puts an asterisk against this run here to end the season. Again, we'll see what happens on Saturday, but it really puts them in this state of I could be talked into. I still lean toward being kind of skeptical, because that's just, everyone kind of knows where I kind of stake my claim with kind of the direction under Sonny Dykes, a month and a half ago, whatever. So I am still skeptical, but I think there is an argument to be made of oh yeah, you are building something heading into 25, and depending on, I think really what it comes down to is how much player development do you think has been happening behind the scenes? Has this 2-year period, 23 and 24, where they've had a lot of stopgap guys and transfer guys, been this bridge to, okay, now that the roster is more of built in the image that Sonny Dykes and his staff want, and they've had this opportunity to develop players, get them in the strength and conditioning program and all of that. What does that look like with what should be a very new lineup in a lot of different spots in 2025? And this was kind of the bridge to get there. I think there's a way you can kind of spin it that way and say you're building into 2025 with this run toward the back end of the season. I also think there's an argument to be made of you're playing against a bunch of, middling to bad teams in Big 12 play down the stretch, that the things that we know are weaknesses of this team weren't able to get exploited as much. And you go into 2025 thinking, oh man, you're building on something, and then things fell flat. I think there's a really plausible argument to make on both of those things, and I haven't decided where I land yet. Maybe talk to me after Saturday.
Yeah. What do you think they want? That's an interesting thought. I mean, when we talk about building a roster in Sonny's image, I could make the argument they are prioritizing trench play in the best way that they can, getting the guys that I guess they have the resources that are available to them. It feels like there's an emphasis on getting plus skill players and having dudes on the outside that can win one-on-one matchups. But one thing that struck me when Sonny was in his press conference last week, and I realized he's sharing Cliff Notes versions of conversations they're having behind the scenes. But Matt, he was telling Steven Johnson from the Telegram, he was yeah, we really need to go get a stud wide receiver in the portal. We're going to prioritize that. And we have this pitch of, well, look at what we did with Jack Besh and look at what we did with Savion. And I think that's awesome. I do feel like there's, that's a good recruiting pitch. And I would think receivers would be lining up to play in an offense like this. But in my mind, I'm like, man, my first priority is I feel like you got to go get a tackle on the outside. Because I know they've been playing Ryan Hughes a little bit, and Ben Taylor Whitfield has gotten a lot of reps over the last couple of years. But I just believe you have to be nastier up front and just better fundamentally.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I can really pinpoint what their identity is trying to be, except for it seems like they put a high priority on guys who can win one-on-one matchups on the outside, on both sides of the ball.
I think that's a really good question, because this is part of the danger of relying too much on the portal. And I think I'm not saying that TCU shouldn't be a team that tries to utilize the transfer portal. I think they should. I think that was a failure of Gary Patterson. I think it's a strength of Sonny Dykes, is that he's able to work the portal. He's able to get good players through it. He's gotten serious, to your point, not just at receiver, but at multiple positions. Jack Besh, Bless Harris, Amani Bailey, Johnny Hodges, Mark Perry in year one, Josh Newton, like go down the list. Like there's a ton of significant contributors that they've gotten over the last 3 years that have plugged holes for them. My question is, at what point are you patching holes, and at what point are you
building a foundation?
Throwing your hands up at your own internal player development.
Okay.
Like, well, this one didn't work out. It's like, okay, but that's on you. Like either you didn't evaluate well, or you weren't able to land somebody that you wanted in recruiting, or you landed somebody that you thought was going to pan out, and again, it didn't turn out. So again, that's a failure evaluation. Or you failed to develop them well, or you failed to retain them. Which, like, there's a whole other side conversation to be having about, like, TCU's NIL apparatus, which I'm not interested in getting into today. I think that's probably a great off-season episode to go through. Right. But my worry from watching Sonny go through this over the first 3 years is it's just like I don't know how successful they're being when it comes to developing the players that they recruit out of high school. Like, just that's the short version of it, right? And again, that's what I think is your pitch for 25 is for the optimists' pitch for 25 is, okay, we've spent these 3 years kind of getting our guys in. We had bridge we had bridge players at certain positions, but we believe in Ben Taylor Whitfield and Ryan Hughes and in Tobias Steps on the offensive line. And we believe in Marcus Deal and Avion Carter and, Paulo Iwale and Michael Ibekinakide when they get back on the defensive line. And we believe in Jonathan Max and Max Carroll at linebacker. And we believe in Jordan Bailey and Dozie and Kyle Baker, Major Everhart. Like, we believe in these players that we got at receiver. And we just needed time to develop them, but we wanted to be competitive in the short term while we developed our guys, right? Mm-hmm. That's what I think the pitch is. And then if it's like, we need one outside, to your point, if the answer is really like, we've got Eric McAllister on one side, we just need one other guy who can win at the other outside receiver position, and we don't think Baker or Terry Shelton, who they just got a commitment from, are going to be ready to be that guy tomorrow. Okay. And if you think you can land somebody, great, go do it. But if that change, so if you're like, we're looking for 3 starters in the portal, great. If that's your perspective, then awesome. If we're looking for 2 starters on the offensive line and 2 starting receivers and 2 starting safeties and a starting linebacker and a starting defensive tackle. Well, now that's when things like red flags start going up for me. Because then it's like, okay, what have you been doing for 2.5 years, right?
No, I agree with that. And I mean, hopefully they're at a place this year where they're not having to shuffle 3 or 4 guys on the O-line, but that's been a big part of the problem last couple of years. When we come back, we'll discuss what's actually improved in the last few weeks. That's coming up next year on Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. Thank you to our friends at Gametime. If you need tickets to a sporting event, theater show, maybe you're looking for tickets to a movie that's out, Moana 2 or Wicked, you can go to the Gametime app today. Use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Gametime makes it really simple for you. The tickets go straight to your app. You don't have to wonder where they went. And I think it's the best secondary ticket app on the market. It's very seamless. It's very easy. There's no hidden fees. There's fees, but they tell you what you are up front. They give you a picture that shows you your view from your seat. Gametime. Download the Gametime app today. Again, that promo code is LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms and conditions, as always, do apply. So, Matt, I mean, I guess what has improved in your eyes? We talked about kind of cobbling together a run game. They protected the ball better. You can hit on those things. What else have you seen that you're like, okay, this has been – they've taken a step here in the second half of the season, and maybe they can build on it moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think the run defense has gotten marginally better. I think the Baylor game is a big black eye on that effort over the back half of the season. But with the exception of that game, you know, Taj Brooks still ran for 130 yards on you, but it wasn't like at a crazy like per carry clip. Mm-hmm. You like Utah, all they were capable of doing was running the ball, and so you're like, okay, you're one dimensional, we can shut that down. That's great. You know, Arizona and Oklahoma State not able to run the ball against you either. Again, bad teams, but did what you're supposed to do, right? So I think the run defense on the whole has improved. I think obviously with the Baylor game, you put the asterisk of Marcus Steele and Hakeem Ajalele were not out there, which affects it as well. Mm-hmm. I just butchered his last name, so I apologize on that. But Ajit Eliath. I'm sorry.
Eliath, yeah,
there we go. And so I think you put an asterisk next to the Baylor game of like, oh, you didn't have, you know, two of your, you know, kind of your stalwarts in the middle of the defensive line. So like that affects it as well. And so I think that's better. I agree with you on Savion. I think that's not something you can sustain into 25 because Savion's going to next year, right? Mm-hmm. So that's one of my big questions for 25 is like, do you have an answer in the running back room that you're confident in, and can you block for him better? Because those you didn't have answers to either of those questions in 24, but they've shown the ability to kind of to a willingness to try things and see what works and make changes when things aren't going well, which I think is, you know, a big part of being successful as an offense is understanding what's working for you and what's not, and adjusting to how defenses are playing you. So I like those things. I do think Josh Hoover has been better taking care of the football in the last few weeks. Really like since the Texas Tech game, 3 straight games where he's like been pretty lights out when it comes to delivering the ball with accuracy and on time. And I thought there was at least a couple plays, one in that touchdown of JP Richardson against Arizona, where he just slung it with pressure bearing down in his face, and as he took a big hit. And that to me stood out as, oh, okay, do we have something here kind of moment with Hoover? Because I think he models so much like, honestly, like another Sonny Dykes QB and Jared Goff, in that, like, if he's clean and he gets to play from the pocket, surgical, makes great decisions, in rhythm, is accurate with the ball. You get pressure on him, or you force him off of his spot, or you ask him to run around and move, things break down fast, and that's where all the turnovers have happened. And he made a really accurate, on-time throw with pressure in his face in that moment, and I'm like, okay, if he can do more of that. And then he also ran for a couple first downs, which I was like, where would that come from? So I think if those are things, if that's a dimension that he's adding to his game, I'll be very curious to see how much they talk about that in the offseason, if that's something that, like, oh, they're trying to, get him to put on a very normal offseason thing. It's like, oh, we're trying to get Hoover to put on like 10 pounds.
Right.
And we're working on his, we're working on his speed training and things like that. And then that's something I'll be interested to see if they talk about it all, come spring.
On Friday, I talked about, it was actually, and Shehan wrote this probably a month ago now, but Shehan J. Raja from CBS Sports wrote a piece about Big 12 quarterbacks, and he was ranking them. And I remember he reached out to you. You weren't like a contributor, but like he got your opinion on Josh. Yeah. And I believe he had Josh in like tier 3 of just kind of like guys that could get the job done, basically. Yeah. So I wonder because you look at the numbers and it's pretty remarkable. I mean, it's up there with just about any TCU season from a passing perspective that you could want. We don't really talk about him yet in the same breath as some of the greats. Mm-hmm. I know winning has to do with part of that, but is it just as simple as wins and losses? Is it protecting the ball better, adding that second dimension? Like, what do you feel like he has to do to take another step and be kind of one of those pantheon guys that we talk about down the road?
I think the first thing is the turnovers. Like, I think because against Houston and against SMU, and then almost the case against against Texas Tech, his turnovers directly contributed them to either losing or like coming very close, right? Again in the instance of Texas Tech. And I think there's a different, if he were putting up like these numbers and they were just and their losses were just because the defense was just
bad.
So like string and tin cans, and they were just giving up 50 a game, but he was leading an offense that was scoring 45 a game, and he was throwing 40 touchdowns and 8 picks. Like, that's a different conversation than where he's at right now. So I think the turnover thing is big. I also, I think that adding that running dimension to his game, he's never going to be Trevon Boykin or Max Duggan or even like a Kenny Hill. But I think, and Kenny wasn't even that much of a runner, but Kenny, like, defenses had to respect the possibility of it. And that opened up so many things of what they wanted to do in the run game in that like magical 2017 season where they go to the Big 12 title game. And they utilized Kenny in some other ways there too, but he was deadly efficient with the ball, still holds the record for highest completion percentage in a season for a TCU quarterback. And when they asked him to run the ball, or when they did those little like double passes to him, and that, like, his athleticism was something that other teams had to account for. He didn't have any vertical passing to his game, not so much, but he was efficient enough with what they were asking him to do, and he made defenses consider multiple things. And I think that's the thing for Hoover is if he can make defenses consider other things, and he can also increase the amount of efficiency that he's got in his game, then that Kenny Hill tier in the terms of the TCU quarterback pantheon, the modern one, would be kind of a really ideal place for him to end up. And he honestly, and to his credit, I think I could see a better version of like the TCU vertical passing game with him, particularly in this offense, than TCU ever had with Kenny. And so like that could, maybe that's the dimension that he opens up for them rather than running the ball. But I want to see what that area of growth is for him heading into 25. That kind of unlocks a different level for this offense.
Coming up in a minute, I'll ask Matt what he's done with his list. That's next here on Lockdown Horned Frogs. FanDuel, they've been rolling with us since I started this podcast long ago during the COVID season of 2020. We appreciate them. FanDuel.com or the FanDuel app. You hit on one $5 bet, win that, you get $150 in bonus bets. NFL, NHL, NBA, college football, Cincinnati TCU this week. Check out the line, check out the over-under. FanDuel.com or the FanDuel app. FanDuel, it's where the game starts. So, Matt, I mean, I assume you still have the list. What I'm referring to is Matt made a list of just possible future head coaches at TCU. And I think, honestly, Indiana, if you're watching this, losing on the road to Ohio State, that's horrible. You guys should probably revoke that extension and fire Kurt Cignetti today and just send him on his way. And if he ends up in Fort Worth, I mean, who's to say? But just cut ties with him. You don't want to be sitting there at 10-2. You don't want Kurt, the Michael Jordan of James Franklin's, just like piddling around for the next 5 years, losing big games like that. I'm kidding. He's a great coach, and I think that ship has probably sailed, unfortunately. I guess I wonder this, Matt. The reality of it is that we know there's not a coaching change coming now. So have you kind of shelved this out of just like a realization of, okay, this isn't happening, so there's really not a huge reason to like talk about it? Or do you genuinely see something turning here that is giving you optimism about the future with this coaching staff that's currently constructed?
I think it can be a little bit of both. I think from TCU's, from like the people who have the decision-making authority with TCU, I think it is a view of optimism. I think you're looking at it, you're like, hey, 4-1 since the bye. You hope to be 5-1 after Saturday. Cincinnati's a solid team. That's not a gimme by any means, but if you can win that game, you finish the season 8-4. Mm-hmm. I'm not worried about the bowl game. I don't think anyone should evaluate any team more positively or more negatively based on results from a bowl game, just because of the number of opt-outs that we have now. I just think you throw it out. Like if you get to add that extra number in the W column, that's great. But like we don't need to act like it's actually a meaningful data point. So let's call the record at the end of the regular season what it is, which again, if you win on Saturday, would be 8-4, which would be a great finish compared to starting 3-3, right? And so I think it's really hard to make that change for a team that just went 8-4. And also in this environment, I don't think, and someone was saying this earlier, I don't know of a power conference job that's open right now. You starting to see some of the G6 jobs open, but I don't know of, I'm sure there will be some here by the end of the season, but ACC, Big 10, SEC, Big 12, I don't know of an opening in any of those conferences. Like Florida's keeping Billy Napier, like a lot of the ones that we thought were gimmies, like they're staying put. And I think a big part of that is how just not conducive the current calendar of college football is to conducting a coaching search. And I don't think any team really wants to be the first team to have to figure it out. And I think that's another thing for TCU. It's like, I think TCU was looking for good reasons to give Sonny more time. Because if you were asking him, if you were having to be on the hook for the cost of his and his staff's buyout and the cost of hiring a new staff, as well as whatever revenue sharing probably starting in 2025, plus a lot of the candidates that you probably would have wanted. Some of the names that I just threw out there, right? You're thinking of like Will Stein at Oregon, or Andy Kotelnicki at Penn State, or Cignetti at Indiana, or John Summerall at Tulane. I've completely been Summerall filled. I think he's a great coach. I think whoever gets him next is going to be great. Tulane's still in the running for the playoff right now. Like it's an outside shot, but they could get in, right? And coaches who are in line for a playoff, who think they're going to be preparing for a playoff game in December, are not going to take a job in November where they need to be recruiting for that new job before conference championships start, because that's when early signing day got moved up to, right? Like the idea of a power conference school that wants to be a contender trying to get a consensus, like really well-regarded candidate, I think it's going to be really hard with this calendar as currently structured. And I think not just TCU, I think most schools are like, you know what, let's punt. Let's try and make it work with what we have currently and because we have a potential to make the roster situation irrevocably worse for like 2 years if this goes poorly, because of all the players who could transfer out and not being able to really get a full signing. Like, let's just not deal with it. Let's maintain. I'm not saying that TCU is wrong and is like TCU or any school is wrong in making that decision. I think it's an important part of, you have to really know that what you have currently is just
broken,
DOA and broken and unsalvageable, right? And I, as a mea culpa, like, I used the word unsalvageable for TCU when they were sitting at 3-3. I thought there was not, and like, to their credit, they have proven me wrong. In terms, I didn't think they had the resiliency or the mental toughness or the ability to adjust that they have demonstrated here down the back half of the schedule to get into this position. So a lot of credit is due to Sonny Dykes and the staff for getting some things figured out. Do I know, again, come back to, is it sustainable? I don't know. But I think, yes, sticking with Sonny Dykes and sticking with this staff and trying to make it work based on, again, the results they've got in the recruiting trail and the fact that they've been able to kind of turn things around on the field, and along with all the other circumstances, I do think it's the right move for now. I just don't know for 2025 if we're going to be having a hindsight's 2020 conversation like in October, or if it's going to be like, oh man, they really made the right call because now TCU's in the Big 12 title hunt, and all of that. It's very hard for me to get a read on, but I do think, like, with the results they put out right now, I think staying the course with what they've got completely makes sense.
Yeah, I think so too. And my historic feeling on buyouts, or my general feeling has been in the past, like, everybody says it's too expensive until it's not. Like, everybody gives you the line of like, oh, they could never afford the buyout, but then like they afford the buyout. I do think it's different though in the revenue sharing world, where you just don't know what your payroll is going to look like next year and in the coming seasons. So, I mean, you can't be on the hook for this dead money that you've been in the past. It's just not, it's not sustainable until you know exactly what you're going to have to do moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it, because, and there's also the added benefit of like, okay, if you decide you do want to make a move next year, inevitably the buyout's going to be smaller. So like, you do yourself a favor in that regard. But unless you are just really sold on like, there's just nothing working, which TCU showed, like there's some stuff working, right? To your point, like, I don't think money's the problem in terms of TCU doesn't have the money, and they're also not locked into a Jimbo Fisher level contract with Sonny Dykes. But you don't want to spend that money unless you feel like you have to. And I think TCU's administration, the athletic department, and the booster base is reasonably of the opinion right now that like, we're not sold on we have to make this move right now. So let's wait and let's see if this hope that you think has been building here in the back half of this season, let's see if it carries into 25, and then you can make a little bit more informed decision.
Season finale this Saturday. Can you believe it? Cincinnati, 5:00 on ESPN+. He's Matt Jennings. I'm Steven Simcox, and this is Locked On Horned Frogs. It's your team every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast.